You're listening to another episode of the Inspire Health podcast. Thank you for joining us. This episode features one of my closest friends and all-around brilliant guys, Dr. Michael Meade. If you've wondered what is really going on with the abundance of ADHD, anxiety, depression, and stress in today's youth, then tune in and listen to these pearls of wisdom. Dr. Meade blends his unique perspectives as both a psychotherapist, naturopathic doctor, as well as a father, in order to break down answers, strategies, and solutions, not only for our kids, but also for the parents. He provides us with the strategies that we need in order to best support our children. He's been my personal go-to for years when I have questions about my kids and parenting, and I really loved picking his brain in this episode. I think we pulled out some really great advice. Welcome to the Inspire Health podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Inspire Health podcast. With me today is Dr. Michael Meade. He's a graduate of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. He has an honors science degree from the University of Western Ontario and a teaching degree at Althouse College, UWO. Michael further developed his skills in counseling and psychotherapy at OISE and graduated in 2004 with a Master of Education in Counseling Psychology. Michael works with individuals, couples, families, family therapy, children, cognitive behavioral therapy, and brief solution-based therapy models. Michael is a member of the Canadian Association of Naturopathic Doctors, the Ontario Association of Naturopathic Doctors, the American Association of Marital and Family Therapists, and Ontario Association of Consultants, Counselors, Psychometrists, and Psychotherapists. Dr. Michael Meade, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Pleasure to be here.
Super. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about all of this. Michael, I would love to hear your sort of breakdown as far as, I know you've got a diverse history here from being a teacher to a naturopathic doctor to a master's in education and counseling psychology. Can you give me a little story on how did you come about blending all these different worlds?
Part of it by mistake, or not by mistake, but by accident in a way. I think in grade 8, I had an interest in medicine and thought that being a doctor was going to be the route I would take. And probably in high school, really interested in psychology or psychiatry. And fast forward 20 some odd years, and I ended up being a naturopath and a psychotherapist. And it was in university that I discovered what naturopathic medicine was. Went to one of those student health fairs, and there was a booth there from CCNM where we graduated from, and I just kind of read about naturopathic medicine and it clicked. And fast forward, here we are.
What about the counseling side? Because I know after you graduated, then you decided to further and do your master's in education and counseling. How did you decide that counseling was such an important piece of this overall picture?
I think in our training, I don't know what it's like now, but at the time at CCNM, we didn't get a lot of focus on psychology or psychotherapy or even counseling methods. I think we're well equipped to, provide coaching and health and different things like that. But I just wanted to further develop my skills.
Nice. And did you find that doing the master's in counseling brought that aspect of things to life for you in practice? Do you find that you incorporate your counseling piece of it quite a bit?
Well, the way it works with our colleges is you have to kind of do naturopathic medicine or do psychotherapy. So blending the two, in the file is sometimes difficult, but certainly I draw from, I guess, both platforms
Hmm.
in terms of providing my patients and clients some of, the help that they require.
I would love to pick your brain a little bit on what you find primarily with the kids nowadays, what sort of age groups you're working with, and what are some of the primary challenges that you see coming into your clinic over and over again that you're working with?
Age groups, we tend not to go too young, but certainly age 5 and up. A lot of elementary age students, certainly a lot of adolescents. And primarily what we're seeing in clinic is anxiety, depression, um, kids having a difficult time, just balancing everything that's going on, uh, difficulty in coping, with sometimes it seems life just in general, but certainly with all the demands placed upon them.
Well, let's kind of go back to that one because that's definitely an area that I see a lot of is this rise in, we can talk about a number of them, but ADHD and anxiety and depression. And you'd mentioned anxiety and depression and coping. This is something that I have parents coming in all the time talking to me about. And from my approach, I'm looking at several pieces of it we can chat about as we go along here. But from your perspective, when you see these kids coming in from anxiety, depression, how is it presenting? How might a parent know if this is something that needs to be taken to the next step and when they need to talk to someone like you? What would be some signs for a parent to be aware of?
Um, Resisting going to school. So, on Sunday night, getting upset, either crying or not being able to sleep. Some somatic complaints might involve stomach ache, feeling sick. In the morning on Mondays, typically, they don't want to get out of bed, don't want to go to school, don't want to eat, just want to stay home. And certainly, if you see any kind of attachment issues, like getting upset when they have to be dropped off, and just that general resistance to leaving the house.
When do you know, or how would a parent have a better idea of when something is because you mentioned stomach aches, and it's definitely something, a lot of times I'll see kids that come in with stomach aches. It's often tied with a little bit of anxiety. Often it's not uncommon to see things like headaches as well, some of these types of symptoms. How do you kind of flush it out as far as knowing what's legitimately a stomach issue versus what's more of an anxiety response, or do they really marry together, or can you separate them?
Well, what some parents have told me that when they have to start getting ready for school, their child isn't feeling well. Either they have a stomach ache or they feel nauseous, and the parent decides, okay, well, because you're not feeling well, you can stay home today. And, almost immediately they perk up and they want to go play, or, they'd like to go outside, or, they want to get on their gaming console. So I think you have to follow the behavior, because those feelings are real. Feelings of anxiety, you do feel, certainly it's different than actually being sick with a flu bug or some kind of gastric issue.
Sorry, Mike, we had a glitch there on the audio. Can you repeat that last part of it? You said the feelings are real, so not to discount the feelings, but
Yeah, certainly, there can be a lot of stomach pain or stomach issues with things like anxiety or even depression for that matter. But so don't discount that. But when you see everything kind of resolve almost immediately, when the threat of having to leave the house is gone, then you can probably be assured that it's not necessarily a physical issue.
gotcha. And that still at that point, they might very well have some physical issues that go on at that time, but it's just coming from more of a nervous system imbalance where they're anxious or depressed or something else is going on that needs to be addressed.
Right.
So there has definitely been a rise in the diagnosis of a lot of these things over the years. And when you were mentioning some of the having trouble coping with life, what's going on? Like, are the stresses that much worse than they used to be when you or I were growing up? Are there, why are their coping skills so much less? What's sort of a big picture that's going on as to why we're seeing such an increase in this?
Well, I think when we were growing up, right, we born in the 70s, going to school in the 80s. I remember in our household, we had a TV, but it had 3 channels, black and white. And so no gaming or any kind of online stuff. So most of the time was spent outside playing with friends. I think in some ways it was definitely a simpler time. And if I was involved with any extracurricular stuff, would have been maybe one thing per season. What I see with a lot of kids is they're coming in and their time is scheduled. It's just so full. There's the music classes, and then there's dance and soccer and swimming, and then these kids have to somehow find or carve out a little bit of time for their schoolwork. So I think the demands and the pressures are much higher for kids these days, and I think they're having a difficult time, trying to figure out how to fit it all in.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned a point about having their schedules very full, and I definitely see this too. Where is the blend on that? Because you get 2 different philosophies on that. Some people telling where you need to keep your kids active, they're young, you want to expose them to so many different aspects. So you want to give them a chance to go to dance and do martial arts and do hockey and do sports and do all these different things. And then they still have their studies that they have to stay up on and all these other pieces. What is the blend? How much of that can be a beneficial stress relief versus where it starts to become detrimental and kind of breaking them down and limiting their ability to manage the rest of their world if it's too fully scheduled? What do you kind of find works? Where's the balance and how do you work with that?
I think it's individual. There are some kids who will thrive at being busy. And I think that just comes down to their own personal makeup. I think the kids that get into trouble are ones that naturally just don't thrive in that kind of environment. So I think the parent has to figure out, what's working for their individual child. And I think scheduling something every night of the week probably makes things more difficult. Most of the kids I see, they complain that they're tired because they're so busy, and they just want a night where they don't have to do anything. And I think in part of the blend or part of the balance, you'd be finding one night that's just a down night, or one day on the weekend that's just reserved for hanging out and not doing much.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just allow the family unit as best as you can too to actually connect. Do you find changes in that that's gone on as far as one other layer that might be there? Is there, I'm just going through some of the different theories that I've read about before too. And as far as parental involvement, is there changes in that can play with it? What can parents do to assist their child from this piece of it? There's a couple parts. I'm always curious to know more about what can the child do to try and improve their coping strategies so that they've got some empowerment themselves, and then how do parents best kind of support that as well?
You mentioned the family unit, and I just reflect upon some of the kids that come into our clinic, and the majority of them come from a family unit that's been disrupted in some way, either through separation or divorce or loss of a parent. So that's certainly a key piece. And in those situations where the family is blended or reconstituted or whatever the term is these days, I think parents can do best by their children by being on board, by being in communication, by being civil and non-conflict, approach things in that way. Because a lot of these kids are spending half their time at dad's and half their time at mom's, or the week is split up, 2 days here, 3 days there, and that can be quite disruptive. So I think, in that situation, parents who, are keeping their kids' interest in mind and as a priority, then that can be helpful. A family that's intact, in terms when it comes from a coping perspective, I think parents want to do the best they can for their children, but they sometimes have a hard time letting them fail. And resilience is increased when a kid happens to fail, and then they're supported and comforted, and the parents are there to champion. But certainly just letting them struggle.
That's actually a really important point, I think, that you just mentioned around this concept of building resilience and parents being comfortable enough with allowing kids to fail. So can you go into that one a little bit more, and give sort of some, what does that look like for a parent? Because again, there's all these models of parenting seem to come in, and it sort of seems like fad diets a little bit, the same way as sometimes fad parenting can be. And for a long time, it was, praise your kids all the time. And the idea of being okay with letting them fail, sometimes that sets up a bit of a dichotomy where you're praising this child, and then sometimes what I've seen is that some kids, when they're praised over and over again, that it gives them a little bit of a false sense of security around where they're at and who they are. And then when something does happen, they take it very personally, and they have a very difficult time with failure. So what's your experience with that? And how would you how could parents support that process? Because it is such a valuable process to develop.
Yeah. Well, first off, giving them a chance to try new things, right? And to try different things. So providing a space and opportunity to, to develop their skill set. A simple example might be, like playing games, right? I have a colleague who when they play games with their kids, a lot of parents, will want to build up their confidence and let them win. And this particular person, if the child wins, great, but they don't let their kid win. So like even playing a board game, and you see it sometimes in clinic. Kids want to succeed. They like to win. Everyone likes to win. But I think letting a child win just for the purposes of, pumping them up is probably detrimental in the long term. So that would be a simple example. And even kids in sports, it's more about participation than winning or losing. And there's a big controversy about that. Should be another topic, but I think it's important that children have an opportunity to know what it feels like to feel defeated, right? And then to be able to pick themselves up from that, say, okay, going to try again, and I'm not going to let this sink me totally. And that's where parents come in. It's like it's all right to fail, and share examples of when they failed themselves. I think that's important. Kids need to hear that their moms and dads are real, and they've struggled, and even if they struggled, they've learned and they moved on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely prepares them for the rest of the world outside of the bubble of being at home, for example. When they're in the workforce, down the road, whatever it might be, if they're even playing competitive sports or whatnot. I mean, like you said, there's going to be failures. So how do we navigate that and then move forward from it and learn from it? And I definitely find this all the time too. Well, a couple of things. I have a stepson too, who's 14. And partly when you were even explaining that a good opportunity for them to learn to fail is to try new things. Partly what I find now is it's in my stepson's 14. So sometimes that age group, I find not just that age group, but if they're not good at something right away, I find a lot of times they don't tend to stick with it for very long. It's almost like, I don't know if you're finding that that's coming around more and more too, but the idea of, putting in a little bit more time, developing those skills, seeing yourself progress naturally through failure and development, which is so beneficial. But sometimes I find that if they don't kind of catch on to something very quickly, that they might just kind of leave it and go back to what they are comfortable with. Have you found that too, or is there any comments around that?
Yeah, some of the kids that I've worked with, they they feel as though they have to be perfect the first time. I do see that, and I hear that from parents. Um, I also find that those kids are the ones that tend to be a little more anxious about about doing new things and trying new things. Um, and I think all you can do in that situation is keep encouraging, right? Keep providing opportunities, keep coaching the child to try, and they don't have to be perfect. In some ways, is there anything, is there such thing as perfection? Not really.
No, I think it's perfect when we actually do fail, and just the attitude around continually trying to improve off of that. That's really where perfection lies. It's an
Yeah.
ongoing process. Mike, one of the things I'm also really interested in is this diagnosis of ADHD, which has been skyrocketing over the last several years. I was I was looking up some stats on that from the CDC and from some other resources, and they were looking at about 42% increase in the diagnosis over the past 8 years. And trying to debate, is this just an overdiagnosis because it's more in the public eye, so people are looking for it? Is it legitimate? Is there actually, we're seeing this, that there's a lot more of the symptoms of ADHD that are coming up, and why that might be playing into things? What have you found in practice? Do you see this rise in ADHD like I'm talking about?
I do. I do. And I think there's a difference between ADHD and being busy. And what I see a lot of times happening is, and especially with boys, they're busy and they're busy in school, and they need to move, and they actually learn better when they're moving. And although that's disruptive for the classroom and super difficult for the teachers, I think being busy is sometimes misinterpreted as having ADHD or some other type of issue. Um, there are kids that really, really do match the criteria, and they can't help themselves, and they cannot sit still. They just can't do it, no matter how hard they try. And I think those are the children that some of the approaches for ADHD are work well for. But for a lot of these kids, I think the way that the classroom is set up is difficult. They go from play-based kindergarten, where they're constantly moving or doing floor time, into grade 1, where there's the expectation that they will sit at a seat and be attentive and listen and not move. And I think that transition is difficult for some children. I know a lot of teachers who allow for, movement in their classroom. They do a fantastic job. But I think what we're seeing is some of those kids they're having a hard time transitioning into like the upper years of elementary school.
Has there been a big change though in the way the school system runs the programs, like from when we were going through school and the amount of movement that we maybe had versus what's going on in the school system now and the amount of movement that's allowed? Has there been dramatic difference with that would be the only kind of correlation to why we see so much of it? Because I absolutely agree with you. Movement is a huge piece, and I think for the most part, there's not anywhere close to enough movement that goes on through school. And the way the school system's set up currently is definitely not conducive for a 7-year-old boy, for example, who does need to move. And you talk to any teachers and they'll tell you the same thing. But has it been that much different than what it was before? Do you know?
I think so. For example, even out on the playground, right? There's no hands, no touching, no roughhousing. And I think when you and I growing up, we were out tearing around, tackling each other, wrestling on the ground. And it wasn't violent or bullying or generally people didn't get hurt, but certainly there was an opportunity to release a lot of that energy. And I think in Quebec, if memory serves me correctly, I was reading an article the other day, they're experimenting with controlled rough play.
Oh, interesting. What does that exactly look like?
Yeah, it's where teachers are monitoring kids and they're allowing them to maybe wrestle a bit, maybe to get a little bit physical. And they're finding that it's really helping in the classroom because the kids, they expend that energy, and some kids really need to get rid of the energy.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I grew up doing martial arts for a long time. And not that martial arts was in school, but at least after school most of the time, a few days a week anyways. And often I'd practice on my own. So that the ability to kind of get that out and get that, whatever it might just be built up energy, built up aggression, whatever it might be that's going on as a young boy. I found that incredibly therapeutic. And to be able to do that with my friends in the club was a tremendous release for me. So that's actually I think that's a really great idea. Are they seeing some promise with it then?
Yeah, so far.
Then just a matter of what's going to happen as far as being able to actually integrate something like that, because I can see where there could be a lot of throwback about that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately. What else are you finding related with ADHD? Anything else that kind of comes up other than the restless energy there? And maybe just can you throw out a few of the different key symptoms that you tend to find with the kids that come and see you? For parents, if they're wondering, because I know when I look at the list of ADHD symptoms, in my mind, I think really almost any young boy would have ADHD based on most of the symptoms on that. So when does it kind of become more of a problem versus it might just be that they need to move more?
I don't know if you see this in practice, but you'll have the kid who's, parents will complain that they can't focus on doing their homework. They're unable to transition from task to task. They, can't follow direction, especially if that direction has 3 parts. So you ask a kid to put their shoes away, pick up their backpack, unpack their lunch, and put the dishes in the dishwasher. It's like a multifaceted task. And a lot of the parents that I hear from, it's like by the time that they go to get their shoes, they've forgotten what they were supposed to do with them. And I think that's that's part of it. So, and then the the other thing that I see is those same kids who are unable to attend to one task or follow direction, or unable to focus on their homework, can be hyper focused on their video games, or hyper focused on their electronic devices. So in one area, they're able to focus beautifully on something, and many other areas they can't.
I was talking to Dr. Shanker in a podcast a while ago, and we were talking about some of those things, and he brought up a really neat, interesting point, because a lot of times I will find that it's very easy, and most boys particularly are very drawn to their electronic devices, more so than most of the girls that I've seen. Not that it's only boys, but I definitely see that being more predominant. And one of the things he was mentioning was that at the underlying of all of it is, how do these children learn to self-regulate, and how do they be able to regulate more effectively? And he said that there is a big difference between adaptive and maladaptive ways of dealing with stress. And he said, for example, you might see a child be able to, go on and play a video game and seem like they're really calm, right? But he said there's a very big difference between genuinely being calm in your body and actually being sort of what looks like well-behaved or kind of quiet. Is that a lot of times some of that stuff can be very maladaptive ways of dealing. So you're maybe not actually calm, but you are not aware of all of the other stuff that's still going on when you're sometimes in a world of computer games. And then you end up almost in a bit of a deficit after the fact. So I'm wondering how much of that too, because there is such a large amount of that. I mean, we had some video games growing up, but it wasn't anything to the degree or nearly as addictive as what the games are like now. Do you see any troubles with that? Do you see any? I know I've read articles on addictions to video games, and particularly this Fortnite game that's out now, and a lot of kids being really addicted to that. Do you see anything like that? Do you ever find that addictions for things like that that come into the clinic now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All the time. All the time.
What's your take on all of that? What's going on?
Um, well, comes down to neurotransmitters, I think. Basically, if you look at the work of Gabor Mate, we're not addicted to running or food necessarily, or video games. We're addicted to the rush of oxytocin. And so when these kids are leveling up on Fortnite, or they're successful at getting a new patch or badge or whatever it is, oxytocin gets released, and it's a feel-good chemical. It's the same thing that gets released when you have a warm, snuggly hug. And I think that's what we get addicted to, is that rush.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think at the heart of all of it is this chemical storm that gets developed and what we tend to get addicted to. And oxytocin, I think at the same point, dopamine as well. You kind of get these two things that sort of tweak our feel-good, pleasure-seeking centers, and then we just want more of it.
Yeah.
And the repetition of some of that stuff that kind of pushes it quite strongly, like things, for example, like video games, then can start to become addictive because you need even more of it to get the same sort of rush from it. Really not any different than like a drug dependency in a lot of ways. When you're seeing children with addictions to some of these things, how do you start the process on weaning back off? Where do you begin that? Because most of the time what happens, and I'm a parent too, with a 1 and a 2-year-old and a 14-year-old stepson, and the hard part is that when you do start to try to tailor some of these things, there's a lot of feedback. You get the kids that can have an absolute hard time trying to decrease their video games. You take a video game away from most kids, and you will see the backlash on that. So How do you start that process? What would be some strategies for parents to even start there? Because I generally think a lot of parents want to, but they don't really know where to begin. And they run into so many troubles, and then it becomes a big fight again, and there's a lot of screaming and everything like that. So, where do you even start with that? What would you tell parents that are in that situation?
Yeah. Well, you don't have to stop something you never start. So in a perfect world, you know, never start. That's not about to happen. But I think one thing you have to keep in mind is, yeah, if you're trying to tailor back or remove something that the kid really, really loves, there's going to be conflict. There's no question. They're going to fight you on it. But anything that I've read and anyone that I've talked to that's been successful, it doesn't last, right? You're not talking about days and weeks. You're talking about, you know, hours, a period of time, and it's about, if both parents are home, then, you know, teaming up, providing a united front. Um, if it's and I think it's hard, especially when I talk to my single parents. It's you know, they're working two jobs, they're exhausted, and they just don't want the fight. So suggesting that they remove the device is sometimes really, really scary. And I think parents love their kids, and they don't want to see them hurt. And I think we will avoid doing anything that causes our kid pain. But in this situation, that short-term pain is really beneficial in the long term. And I think there has to be limits set. You've read the literature. I don't think screen time under 8 years old is even recommended. Certainly nothing under 4. But even into adolescence, you know, half an hour a day, an hour tops is what I've seen in the research. The kids that I talk to come in the clinic, and I ask them, I ask every one of them, how much time do you spend on the screen? And they're logging 3 to 6 hours a day. And this is, you know, sometimes 10, 11, 12 years old. And it can even go higher and with the teens that I see. And that would be, I think, all parents could do. Would you go cold turkey in that situation? That might be really, really difficult. So you start to pare down, right? It's like, okay, well, let's take that 3 hours and get it down to 2, and then, you know, get it down to 1. And I think what also is helpful is, you know, parents having the time and the energy to engage, because it's pretty easy when you've had a long day and you just want a little bit of peace of quiet, to say, you know, here, go watch this video, or, you know, have fun playing your games.
As usually the parents are trying to have a little bit of downtime themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So, say a child is very much addicted, and I would say probably you'll see, I mean, I would say originally you'd think about teenagers, but it's not just teenagers now. I actually have a lot of kids that are under teens that are or pre or like tweens that are addicted to these too. How would you start the process? So what would be a bit of a strategy for parents to start to initiate that want to, you know, do they limit their time by 20%? Do they try, like, what would you kind of start with? Where could a parent start with that?
Um, what I recommend they do is choose one night a week where there's no electronics, or one day of the weekend, you know, where there's no electronics. So, you know, and that way the kid doesn't feel as though they're missing out, you know, every day by taking away an hour, but you just kind of, you know, you have a little bit of a fast on one night a week, and fill that time with, you know, going outside, doing something together as a family, playing games, you know, going for a meal. And I think what happens is the kid At first it's like, they don't like it. I don't want to do this. This is, silly or dumb. But then they realize that, what, it was kind of nice to connect with mom and dad, or connect with mom or dad. And, they, I would hope that it kind of just sits in their brain. And then next time it's like, oh yeah, it wasn't terrible not having that game for one night. Maybe we'll try that again, and build upon that.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. And the key thing I think that parents need to remember too that's so helpful is really, I don't think of it any different than when, say, someone is coming in to see me and they need diet counseling and they've got certain foods that they're sensitive to or that aren't benefiting them. You don't just take away, you have to put something back in. So it's like you can't just take the game away and then think everything's going to be okay. Take it away, but add something back in. And most of the time, that would be adding yourself in some kind of human connection, I think, probably at the heart of it. And then you start to fill those oxytocin, those dopamine levels up from a very positive place, as opposed to almost an artificial way of trying to get that fix. I think what's really interesting too is, I'm not sure if you had heard this before, but I was reading some information with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and they actually didn't let their kids have a phone or a device until they were actually, I think, not until they were in their teenage years. They didn't even get their first one.
Hmm.
So, I mean, here's the two people that are probably at the heart of this entire movement with screens and mobile devices and phones and everything, and they wouldn't let their children have them. So they knew the addictive quality of them.
Yeah, there's a campaign going on right now. It's called Wait Until 8. And the idea behind it is no devices until grade 8, right? So,
Oh,
your
till
kid does,
grade 8. That's fabulous.
yeah, wait until 8. So no phones. Obviously, you're gonna have a computer at home, gaming, but you know, and a lot of parents will say, well, if I don't have the phone, there's no way I can get a hold of them, and they feel more secure when their kid has a phone, and that's fine. So just no data, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
so
that's go ahead.
yeah, wait until 8. So hold off until grade 8 if you possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know with our stepson, that's what we've done is he has a phone so that we can touch base with them, and he's can phone and text, but there's no data on it. So
Yeah.
for the most part, that usually works pretty well. That also brings up another topic though for me with the accessibility that most kids have, especially teenagers. Almost all kids have phones and they're online and they've got their entire online community. And one thing I see a lot of too is this has completely changed the landscape of what bullying used to be. And another huge concern for our kids is this whole realm of cyberbullying and how it's completely changed the dynamics of what bullying. It's almost like you can't escape the bullying now. You know,
Hmm.
before if you got bullied at school, you could get back home and at least have the safety of your own home. Now it seems like no matter where you go, it's possible these things can follow you around. Have you seen this coming up in clinic? And I think in general, this also plays into a lot of the anxiety and depression that I see.
Yeah, I'm sure the studies have been done, but in my opinion, it's directly linked. Do see a lot of it coming into clinic, and the bullying has moved from the playground to the living room. And like you said, I agree with you. The kids just they can't escape it, but they can. And the solution and the answer to that is turn the device off. Right? It's going on, but you don't have to engage. And I think that's where parents can help is to really set some strong limits on what the kids are looking at when they're home. Uh, Home needs to be a safe place, a place where they can unplug from all of that, because I find a lot, and mostly with teens, but a lot of them, the ones coming into clinic is what's leading to their symptoms of depression, or at least low self-esteem, is um, comparison. Comparing themselves to everyone else, and so and so is doing this, and I wasn't invited to that chat group, and these people are getting together. And when we were kids, when you left the playground, you went home, you had no idea what your peers were doing until the next day, where you met on the playground and you talked about what happened last night. And I don't think kids have that luxury anymore. They know exactly what's going on 24/7. And I think it's problematic, certainly with the kids that I see coming in the clinic.
So definitely part of it is, if it's going on, then parents can start to restrict access or try and talk with their child about not accessing Instagram and Facebook and everything else that's going on. That's probably just keeping it in their mind. But you mentioned another part too around comparison, and ultimately I think that's at the heart of a lot of problems, not just for kids but for adults as well. How do we foster a feeling in our children that of self-confidence, where only thing they really need to compare is how their progress is going from day to day, but not how they compare to other people? How would you begin that process? Because that's really such an underlying factor of self-esteem, self-aware, all of these things that just give kids all of the skills that they need to ultimately live a successful life. And when we compare to others, that's ultimately what usually pulls the rug out from underneath us. How do you start that? What does that look like in the family dynamic?
I think it starts really, really young. Gabriel Mate wrote another book with a psychologist, I forget his name. It's called Hold On to Your Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, great book.
In that book, he talks a lot about, kids need to be with their parents more than anybody. They need to be with their parents more than they need to have sleepovers, more than they need to have play dates, more than they need to be involved with teams, etc. I mean, none of those things are bad, but I mean, if you want to build strong, confident, resilient children, then the best people to do that in most cases are their parents. And so I think focusing on family time, and certainly I guess there's some modeling, right? Parents need to be careful of what kind of words they're using to describe themselves. What kind of language they use when they're feeling frustrated, right? If a mom or dad is constantly down on themselves, kids pick up on that. They hear everything, even when it doesn't look as though they're listening. And so I think modeling strong, resilient behavior is a good place to start.
Yeah, that's such a huge piece of it, and it makes sense when you think about it, as far as this relationship we have with our children, is that as much as we're there to support our children, we're also there to learn from our children as much as possible too. I mean, it's definitely a symbiotic relationship in that point of view. Mm-hmm. And if anything is going to be a catalyst for parents to grow and develop and step up into the next level of growth and of evolution for ourselves, it's for the benefit of our children. I know since my kids, that's been a huge impact on me, is to try and be more self-aware around any of my shortcomings and work with them. So you had mentioned kids pick up on everything. It's not as much, I think there's the old saying that, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And I would go as far as say it's actually not what you do either. It's ultimately who you are. Kids pick up on literally like a frequency or a vibration of who you actually are. So, for example, you could say something, but not really mean it. Kids pick up on that pretty quickly. if you're being genuine and authentic within yourself around around what you're saying. So it's not as simple as just saying the right things. It's, are you living that and being an absolute role model for your kids to see it and feel it firsthand? You can feel when things are incongruent.
Mhm.
And it's also such a great opportunity for us parents to work with that, to be conscious. If we want our kids to be self-aware, if we want our kids to be more self-confident, definitely let's look at ourselves and where can we improve our own self-confidence? Where can we step up? Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yeah, 100%.
Super. One last thing I was wondering about, Mike, was just your take on teenagers and how that kind of changes the game a little bit for parents, because most parents will often tell me how their child just seemed to kind of switch once they sort of became a teenager. This lovable, interactive child that was more with them started to kind of be more recluse. They started to have different, they didn't really want to hang out with parents anymore. What's going on in a teenager's brain? What in a teenager's world? What is so different when we hit that phase of life compared to what it was like usually prior?
Well, with teens, you have, all the stuff of childhood, and then add in hormones, and I think I think the brain is just in an erratic state for a few years there, um, and I think for at least for my parents, it was scary. My mom especially. I think there were days, and she may have even told me this, but certainly there were days where she thought that I needed to be, committed to some of the teenage years, and I wasn't a bad kid by any means. And I guess there's no such thing as a bad kid, but I didn't get in trouble, and wasn't wrapped up in some of the tragic stuff that kids can get wrapped up in these days. But I was defiant and difficult, and I think parents would do best by understanding first that this is a phase and it will end. It's temporary, not permanent, and yeah, and there's lots that from naturopathic perspective that we can do, and certainly from a counseling perspective. And a lot of the kids I see don't feel as though they can talk to their parents for some reason. And when I explore that, and it's not necessarily anything that parents have done wrong, there just seems to be, and what I see a lot of is the kids don't want to disappoint their parents, right? And that's why a counselor or a therapist can be really helpful, because you can talk about things and without the fear of judgment, because that's what therapy is about, is creating a space where it's judgment free, and anything can go. So yeah, what can parents do when teenage years hit? From a practical point of view, what I see a lot is teens are not sleeping enough,
Mhm.
and their nutrition is uh, for lack of better terms, pretty awful. So, certainly tweaking those areas, and the no sleep is directly correlated to the use of devices, right? Uh, so many of these kids have TVs, game centers, phones, all in their room, and any research on sleep is you need a room that's clear of all of those things in order to get good quality rest.
No, that's huge. I say to all of my patients too, if it is, it's like, parents out there, take the devices out of the room when children go to sleep. They do not need a phone. They don't need it to help them fall asleep. They need to find constructive ways to fall asleep. Otherwise, you have no idea how long they are up there. And I can honestly tell you, a lot of those kids can sometimes be on those devices till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh yeah.
And you would have no idea. The other strategy I would do is shut the Wi-Fi down before you go to bed. As a parent, a lot of times what we do at night is, I think it's actually very healthy anyways to shut your router down at night anyways, for everybody's well-being. But particularly just takes away another, first, don't have data plans, and then shut the Wi-Fi off so that nobody can use their devices after a certain period of time. And then the phone gets kind of boring. But I would also just make it a rule: the phones just don't go in the room at night. Computers don't go in the room. They shouldn't have a game console in their room. So otherwise you're just tempting. It's going to be way too tempting, and likely they're going to end up using it. It'd be like if someone was trying to really lose some weight, and you put them into a room where there was ice cream and pizza and everything that they would loved best. Of course they're going to probably sample it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just remove the temptation as much as you can. And that's part of our jobs as parents too, is making some of those decisions. I know you gave me some advice a while back that was tremendously powerful, and that was really pick your battles. It's easy at certain times where you could be in a battle a lot of times with your kids with different things, because you do. And part of their teenage years is them actually figuring out who they are. It's stepping into their own power a little bit. It's pushing their boundaries. So a lot of times you could be at a constant battle. And I know we were for a period of time in a battle a lot of the times. And when you had told me that, it really helped me kind of step back and really decide what was worth my time and what was really easier to let go. And also for parents to remember that there's a lot of other factors that can throw things off. For example, if that child, like you had mentioned, if that child has not eaten, if they skipped a meal, and if their blood sugar is crashing, I can guarantee you, not a good time to have an argument or discussion about something, because they will not be able to hear you. Their body will be so stuck in fight or flight, they won't be able to access the part of the brain that lets them make rational decisions anyway. They'll be all in an emotional state. So we kind of found our own rhythm. And I think the key thing that you're saying is basically parents play an active participatory role in everything. Watch your kids, try and establish authentic connections with them in any way that you can, any way that's going to work, that's going to create some connections. What would be in closing kind of comments here, as I want to be respectful of your time, what would be top few suggestions you could mention to parents to start to incorporate, if they haven't already, strategies to develop a really wonderful connection with their children, to support them in the best way that they can?
Yeah, I'll probably borrow from Gary Dierenfeld. He was, I was at a talk, I think you might have been at that talk too, but he, especially when it comes to teens, is parents need to get up in their teens' business as much as they can. So when you come home from work and your teen is down in the basement, being a basement dweller or locked up in their room, make a point of making yourself known. So go up, say hello, give them a hug, make sure that they know you're there, and that they know that they're there, right? And I think something else that's really, really important, and I don't know, adolescents, teenagers, they need autonomy, but I get a little nervous when autonomy is misinterpreted as privacy. So a lot of teens that I've talked to, I don't think their parents have been in their rooms for 2 years, and parents have no idea what's going on behind those closed doors. So I would encourage parents to adopt an open door policy with their teens, being mindful and respectful of times when they need to be alone, but certainly the room isn't a private space. The room is part of the house that the parents own, and the kids there kind of as a tenant in a way. But yeah, certainly just having a good understanding of what's happening behind closed doors, either the bedroom, what's happening behind the closed doors of social media, and the
Mhm.
various platforms the kids might be on. Because there's some powerful stuff that goes on that the teenage brain is just not able to, you know, to deal with, or uh, even to mitigate some of the damage that can happen.
Yeah, yeah, great points. Great points. Mike, is there anything else that you think is important that you'd like to share before we finish up here? Any other comments you'd like to leave for anybody?
Um,
Any strategies you found particularly helpful within your own life?
yeah, uh, something with little ones that come in, grade 4, grade 5. A lot of the kids that end up coming in to see me have decided that they're bad, and they're bad kids. And something that I started doing now is, um, anytime that I'm working with the kid, I make that statement. I say, that there's no such thing as a bad kid. You know that, right? And some of them like, well, yeah, there is. I said, no, sometimes struggle, and kids that are sometimes in pain, and kids that sometimes, make poor decisions, but you're not inherently bad. And I found that's really helpful, and I think that can work at home too, because a kid does something wrong, they immediately feel as though they're bad, and if a parent doesn't swoop in and correct that, then that can just start a process that doesn't end very well.
That's a really great point to make. It and it makes me think in general about how we have to be careful about very strong polarity statements, right, wrong, good, bad, and really trying
Hmm.
to think of things in so much more of a gray zone. And I was just at a retreat with a author named Greg Braden, and one of the points he was getting at was the difference between um, when we are talking and feeling and making statements from the brain versus when we are making them from the heart. And I'm not saying this in a woo-woo kind of esoteric way. There is a very real neurological connection, neurochemical connection between the heart and the brain. And you can actually get these areas speaking to each other literally in the right way. And it goes into a state of what's called heart-brain coherence. And when you start to get into the brain, he said the brain is a very polarity organ. So it thinks of things from our past judgments, our past beliefs, our past experiences. So it is always going to be weighted in a bias of one sort or the other. And they explain that the heart actually doesn't. The heart is not a polarity organ. The heart has a very different sense of an intuitive sense of right, of what actually feels congruent or not congruent for you. And so if we can get to that place, which often means sort of slow things down, get more connected, get more in touch with those feelings of care, compassion, appreciation. If we can get to that place first, then we tend to avoid a lot of those polarity statements naturally. So most of the hardest part is that when parents are overly stressed, we're not usually in that place. So then it's
Hmm.
important for us to try to find our own ways of self-regulating so that we can get to that place. And maybe that means when something riles us, take some slow breaths for a bit, connect back to that area, slow things back down, and then act from that place, which I know it sounds like a lot of work, and it is some work, but it's work that's worth doing.
Absolutely.
Mike, Dr. Meade, wonderful speaking with you today. Thank you so much for all of your time. How can people learn more about you and get in touch with you or reach you if they would like to?
Well, I'm in Brantford, and I guess we have a website, brantfordintegratedhealth.ca, and or you can call the clinic 226 304 7044. It's hard to remember the numbers, but
That's
probably
okay.
the website is the best way to access information.
We'll put all the info in the show notes at the end of the program. Mike, thanks so much for your time. That was great. I hope everybody enjoys this episode and benefits from some of this experience that's been going on. Mike's been in this field for close to 20 years now. So we graduated together back in 2002. So been doing this for a while. He's got a lot of information to share. So thank you so much, Mike. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.